It had been a pleasant day when you went down hunting earlier, and you even decided to take a nap under a tree. As you wake up under that tree, though, your ears are filled with the alarmed ringing of church bells and the sound of rising water. You get up, you find your horse, you jump on, you do not stop to look behind you. You just race to the highest ground you can find. Your ears are filled with the sound of crashing waves coming from just behind you. Water hits your back as your horse heaves itself to the top of the tallest hill you can find. And then you finally turn around to see your family, your home, everything you knew has been drowned beneath the waves, and you are the last survivor of Leoness. Today we're looking at Leoness, the drowned land of Arthurian legend. But first, my name is Gareth, and I read things and natter about them on the internet for your entertainment. With the introductions out of the way, let's turn to the lost land of Leoness. Leoness is also called Lethauso, and it's a legend from Cornwall, the southeastern tip of England, below Wales, that you should be seeing on your screen right now. So on that map, you see those little islands of fairways off the coast of Cornwall. Those are the Isles of Scilly, and the legend goes that those isles were connected to Cornwall through a stretch of dry land. Not only dry, but green and pleasant and prosperous. It was known for supporting over 140 churches, and this was the land of Leoness. However, someone did something so terrible that the Almighty himself sent a flood to drown this land. Of course, none of the sources I found ever says who did this or what exactly they did, so all I can tell you is it was really bad. This flood was so complete and so sudden that there was only one survivor according to the story, a man named Trevelyan, who is either the prince of the realm or one of its governors. The story is that he went out hunting on the day of the flood and had fallen asleep under a tree. When he woke up to the flood, he saw the rising water, jumped on his white horse, and raced to Cornwall as quickly as possible, barely outracing the waves, and his horse even lost a shoe in the run. He would marry and leave behind descendants under the family name Trevelyan, who kept a white horse on their coat of arms in remembrance. Leoness also shows up in the King Arthur legends, although usually not in the more streamlined version you see in most movies and television shows. There is a whole massive set of legends and stories that have to do with King Arthur and different characters in his story, many of whom don't show up in the standard movie treatment. And I'm not going to delve too deep into that because there are already entire YouTube channels devoting their time and energy to that, and we need to focus on Leoness. Our first story is kind of loosely related to the Lost Land, however. It's the story of Lynette and Leoness. Leoness, in this case, is the name of a girl. The Lady Lyonesse is a ruler of her own lands, and I kind of assume that the lands are also called Leoness, but it's not stated in the story. And she's got a problem. She is being menaced by an ambitious and power-hungry knight who goes by the name the Red Knight, super creative, and he is from the Red Lands. I can see how he got his name at least. And my thoughts on this are, at least it's not a Black Knight. Also, I did try to find more information out about the Redlands, but I couldn't find anything. If you know something about the Redlands of Arthurian legend, please leave a note for me in the comments. Let's move on. Now, Lynette sees that she and her retainers are no match for the Red Knight and his retainers, so she goes running to King Arthur for reinforcements. However, for reasons that weren't made clear to me in the version of the story I read, Lynette doesn't identify herself or really explain her problem. She just kind of shows up to King Arthur's court and demands that he provide her with military aid. This causes problems in King Arthur's court because not everyone is particularly enamored with a young lady showing up and demanding things and not even explaining who she is. But King Arthur finally cuts through everything and provides her a kitchen servant and sends her on her way. But it turns out this is just King Arthur indulging his sense of humor a bit, because that kitchen servant is actually his nephew Gareth, who is in fact a pretty powerful knight all one of his own. Gareth and Lynette travel back to her home, and as anyone who's ever played a video game or a tabletop RPG could tell you, they have several encounters on the way to confront the Red Knight, because as anyone who's played any of these games knows, you can't just walk out from the starting point and confront the big boss. You gotta have some leveling encounters first. On this trip, Gareth fights a green knight, a blue knight, and a black knight. There he is! I was starting to miss him. Gareth, of course, beats them all up, kills the Black Knight, because that's what you do in a King Arthur story, and sends the Green and Blue Knight home to his uncle King Arthur to take an oath of service to him, because that is also what you do in a King Arthur story. Gareth finally then confronts the Red Knight, beats him silly, and promptly falls in love with Leoness, the lady, not the land. Now, Gareth, being a standard man of age 15 to 50, is perfectly willing to dive into bed with her first and worry about the marriage ceremony later, but Lynette is smarter than him and isn't having this, so she manages to block and maneuver him until he decides he's going to do the next best thing. Arrange a tournament so he can pose as a stranger and beat up all of his friends. I swear, there's a number of men out there listening to this who go, that makes perfect sense, I promise. And he does this by convincing Leoness to not only set up this tournament, but to send a report to King Arthur saying, hey, I have no idea where your nephew is. Of course, all the Knights of the Round Table show up, not only to participate in a tournament, but to see if they can figure out where Gareth has gone to. Gareth participates in disguise and promptly kicks the crap out of all of them, because as long as Lancelot is not in the story, Gareth is the strongest knight. At the end of the tournament, he reveals himself, smiles at all of his friends, and invites them to the wedding. You know, I've had friends who would do this to me. Wait, I think I still have friends who would do this to me. Some of my friends would do this to me. Wow, nothing ever really changes. Next, we have the story of Tristan and Isolde, which is part of the greater body of Arthurian legends, but is often shoved into its own category or told as a completely separate story. Tristan is the son of King Meliodas of Leoness and the nephew of King Mark of Cornwall. He's also the biggest, baddest fighter in King Mark's service, so when a marriage is arranged between King Mark and an Irish princess, Isolde, Tristan's the one who's sent to bring her back to Cornwall. Isolde is actually Tristan's age instead of King Mark's age, but to help counter this, Isolde's mother gave her a love potion that she was supposed to share with her husband on the night of the wedding. Now, there are different versions of what happens next. In one version, there's an accident and Tristan and Isolde end up drinking the potion by accident. In another, Isolde gives it to Tristan and they share it on purpose. There are even different versions of the potion, with it sometimes lasting only 3 years, and in others it lasts a lifetime. And honestly, I'm usually not a big fan of love potions. They feel a bit icky to me. I don't like subverting people's free will, but a love potion that two people knowingly take as part of a political wedding is kind of intriguing. I could see that as like a treaty stipulation to lock in a marriage that's supposed to bring a lot of benefits. That's compelling in a certain level, and that's something I would dare any romantic fantasy writer or just any fantasy writer to try and explore and think about the implications of. But let's get back to Tristan and Isolde. Tristan, despite being wildly in love with this woman, still takes her back home to marry his uncle because that's what he promised he would do. Unfortunately, after the wedding and them being together pretty constantly, they're not able to hold out against temptation, and they start getting together intimately behind King Mark's back. Some of the nobles of Cornwall figure this out, and they tell King Mark, who starts trying to entrap them so he can get proof of this adultery. Now, the reason he needs proof is this is a political marriage. He has to justify a divorce to her father and her kingdom. So he basically has to prove a court case here. But he does get the evidence he needs, and after capturing them, basically in mid-deed, he sentences Tristan to death by hanging and Isolde to death by burning at the stake, which, listen, I don't approve of cheating on your spouse. In fact, I'm just going to say you shouldn't cheat on your spouse. I think we should all be able to agree on that. But murder is a massive overreaction. I mean, he could just send her home or stick her in a convent, and not kill anybody. And King Mark, when he cools down and has had some time to think about it, does decide that murdering his wife is an overreaction to adultery. So he decides to pack her up to a leper colony instead, which, yeah, we're still in overreaction land here. I'm sitting here reading the story going, King Mark, just send her home. Just put her on a boat, send her back to her dad, and say, she's your problem now. Folks, don't try to kill your adulterous spouse. Just divorce them and let them be someone else's problem, okay? This is your guidance from Garvin for the week. Meanwhile, Tristan is prepared to die because while he is wildly in love with Isolde, he does believe that he has done something terrible to his uncle, who was also the man who raised him. And let's be honest, Tristan has done something terrible to him. And there's also the bit that Tristan knows his uncle and doesn't believe for a minute that he's actually gonna burn a woman at the stake. However, when he finds out what is actually gonna happen to Isolde, he bursts out of prison like the Kool-Aid Man and runs off to rescue her, and nobody can stop him. After rescuing her, they flee into the forest, and they live there for several years before being found again. Now, King Mark has had some time to cool down, realize that while what they did was very wrong, what he was going to do was also wrong, and this is one of those cases where two wrongs do not make a right. So, after having an adult discussion, Isolde goes back to King Mark, probably because of the politics of their marriage, and Tristan agrees to leave the kingdom in voluntary self-exile. There are other endings of this story, but they're all tragic. For example, in one, King Mark strikes Tristan with a poisoned lance once he realizes what's going on, and when Tristan passes away, Isolde dies of grief. In another story where Tristan does the voluntary exile, he heads to France, meets a woman also named Isolde, and marries her, and that feels weird. You guys tell me in the comment, do you think him marrying another woman named Isolde is weird? Just let me know. Well, in the course of his adventures in France, he gets poisoned, and he asks that they bring Princess Isolde over to cure him because she's very talented at medicine and potions. His friends are supposed to signal their success with white sails on their ship if they got her, and come back with black sails on their ships if they don't, kind of taking a page from Greek mythology here. His wife is very jealous about this, though, and when she sees the ship with white sails, she runs over to Tristan and tells them they're black. And Tristan, believing he's been abandoned by his lady love, gives up the ghost and dies right there. And Isolde, when she arrives, finds out Tristan is dead, believes that she was too late to save the man she loves, and she also just kind of falls over dead. This is an unhappy story no matter what version you pick. We're going to go ahead and leave tragedy behind, however, because outside of Arthurian and Cornish legend, there is also an archaeological note to consider here. So, from 2009 to 2013, a joint study was commissioned by English Heritage. English Heritage is a charity that cares for different historical sites and monuments, among them being parts of Hadrian's Wall, Dover's Castle, and a small place you might have heard of called Stonehenge. And they got the Cornwall Archaeological Unit, which is funded in part by the Cornwall Council. They also got a host of other local specialists and archaeologists, along with other specialists from across England, to study the Scilly Islands, and they found that the islands had once been one big island. There is evidence of inhabitation as far back as the Mesolithic age on this island, but they found no evidence of a land bridge between Scilly and Cornwall. That said, I do find myself wondering if these stories are a distorted memory of a land that was slowly swallowed up by the sea because the sea kept rising even up into the Roman age. Could the story of Lyonesse be a distorted memory passed along by oral folk tradition of the gradual loss of land in the Scilly Isles to the sea? It would be an impressive display if it was a memory that had been passed along for hundreds of generations. It is also entirely possible that this is just a coincidence or part of the fact that there are dozens, if not hundreds, of stories of submerged lost lands throughout northwestern Europe, if not the entire world. Throughout prehistory and history, sea levels have risen and sunk, and that has created stories. But I'll leave it up to you to decide what you think is more likely. That said, I do have to admit, if it was a memory preserved in oral folk tradition, that it lasted so long, even as distorted as it became, it's an impressive feat of communal memory. It's on that note that I'm going to end this week's video. I hope you found it informative, or at least entertaining. If you did, please leave a like, a comment, or consider subscribing, as all of that helps me in my eternal battle with the Dread Lord algorithm. Terror be on his name. If you'd like to have a voice on future videos, by the way, consider joining my Everwise patrons for just $1 a month. Speaking of patrons, I would like to thank my biggest supporter, Big Steve. I hope you are forever safe from the sea and never have to race it to dry land, buddy. Next week, we are heading east to look at the Hindu and Buddhist legends of Shambhala. I hope you'll join me for that, but until then, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and keep reading.